Subscribe to The Honest Critique for current affairs, movie, book, and product reviews. Also, make sure you press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video. The views, information, or opinions expressed during the video series are solely those of the individuals and do not necessarily represent those of The Honest Critique and its employees. The following video contains strong language which may be offensive to some viewers. Viewer discretion advised.
Hello and a very warm welcome. I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Shuki Friedman, Vice President for Jewish People Policy Institute and member of the Faculty of Law at the Paris Academic Center. So thank you so much, sir, for taking your time and speaking to us.
My pleasure.
I want to start the conversation with your initial take on the recent temporary ceasefire that we have seen, and how does it actually ease up the situation with the hostage crisis and the ongoing war? If you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, basically, after 47 years of fighting against Hamas in Gaza, we are going to get into 4 or 5 days of ceasefire or more humanitarian pause, where the army call it, the IDF, and basically the government put 2 targets to the war in Gaza. One is to defeat Hamas and expel them from control on Gaza, and the second, not less important, getting back to now we have a very cruel enemy trying to use kids and women and elder people to blackmail and to get an advantage. We have to maneuver between bad choices. One is to not continue the war up until we defeat him and pause it, which will give him some advantage. But then we have to bring back to the extent we can. First the kids and the women and the elder people, and then the rest of the kidnapped people, the hostages, back home. So the government of Israel has been explained by the Prime Minister yesterday, took a very tough decision with prices to the achievements we got through the war, to pause for a few days and bring home some of the hostages.
And while we've seen the operations in northern Gaza, do you think after the ceasefire, the operations will resume in South Gaza as planned, and the end goal of destroying Hamas completely will still be the same in spite of or having this ceasefire?
Basically, we don't have any choice, because we now realize after the 7th of October massacre of Hamas in the south, that if Hamas will remain on our southern border, no Israeli will be able to live on the southern part of Israel. And therefore, we don't have any other choice. We will defeat Hamas to the extent and the time it will take. If it takes months or year, we continue up until the last gunmen and murderers of Hamas terror organization will be killed or surrounded.
And how do you look at the reason why would Israel choose or opt to go for a ceasefire right now at this particular point of time? Doesn't it show a slight weakness that there was not a positive attitude going for a ceasefire before, but right now? Or how does it affect the IDS model actually while they're fighting the war?
Again, Israel, in the recent 5 weeks already, since it's invaded into Gaza, is fighting street to street, house to house, hospital to hospital. On one hand, to be able not to Hamas. On the other hand, not to get too many casualties of soldiers, and on the other hand, not to stop and continuously combat Hamas. And therefore, on one hand, we didn't push fast. On the other hand, we did had some soldiers being killed, but basically, we've done well by taking over most of the centers of Hamas in the rest of Gaza, the center of Hamas control in Shifa Hospital and other places. So for 6 weeks, almost 6 weeks, we achieved a lot and negotiated for getting back some of the hostages. And now we will stop for a few days and continue later.
I wanted to understand, sir, if you have seen the foreign minister of Qatar's speech in which he lays down what the deal is. And he mentioned about that the point of this deal is to look for a lasting truce in the region, and the deal is reciprocal. He mentions of how even this is pointed in a direction in which it's been to stop this war completely and to have a complete ceasefire, and release the hostages one after the other. But do you think this is something what the Israeli government will be looking at the long term? Because once you have the hostages, that's the major public concern. You would want to finish off Hamas for sure, right?
Again, there are two targets to this war. One, getting back the hostages. The other is enable Israel to live safe and to enable Israelis live in a secure way in the southern part of Israel. If Hamas will keep its power, no Israeli, not in Tel Aviv, and not in the southern part of Israel, will be safe. And therefore, it doesn't matter if we get all these hostages back home, we still need to kill the last murderers of Hamas and get free Israelis and the Gazan people from this terror organization that took control on Gaza by force, by guns, and controlling it for almost 20 years by force, a terror and a horror against its population. So Israeli army, IDF, will do the work. It will take time, but I'm sure at the end, in a few months, there won't be any Hamas person in Gaza.
Sure, sir. And I wanted to understand about the humanitarian assistance part. Under the international law that we have seen that through the Rafah crossing, international humanitarian aid has been used. How does this also come into the larger picture? Because I'm sure the Israeli government and the IDF has kept that in mind while this war is going on.
You're talking about international law?
We're talking about humanitarian aid and assistance.
Of course, again, Israel is obliged to defeat Hamas, but also to keep or be bound by international law. International law forces us to follow certain rules in treatment of the civilian population, not making them dead or terrorism or make them suffer more than needed by the war targets and the international law allowed. So basically, it's not our concern, it's Hamas' concern, but we will follow the international law in a way that we will not breach commitments and obligations that been forced by international law. It's true for the war itself, the way Israel acting in the battlefield, but also the way Israel is acting for the population in Gaza. And you can see in the TV reports how trucks getting in from Egypt and bring supply to Gazan citizens.
And I wanted to understand at this point of time, before I move on to the next part of the conversation, that uh, is there any international law that obliges, for example, a country like Egypt to take some of the refugees or people who want to come from Gaza, or is no such law that binds Egypt to do that? Because we have seen humanitarian crisis in the southern part as well, with a lot of people moving from the northern part and wants to cross over to Egypt, but the Rafah crossing has not been open for that.
Mhm. Basically, international law oblige whoever crossed the border to oblige Egypt to accept him as a refugee. But if he's still in the Gazan side, Egypt does not must accept him. There is a possibility for these people from Gaza to apply for the status of refugee in Egypt or other places. So if other countries will open their doors to refugees from Gaza, they will be able to immigrate there. But so far, since Egypt reject any possibility of Gazan civilians to passing border also by forces, they can't cross the border and get the status of refugee up until they get the license or acceptance of the Egyptians.
And I wanted to bring the conversation now to something that you have written and you specialize in. For our viewers, if you could explain a little bit about the ultra-Orthodox or the Haredi secular divide that's there in Israel. And I was reading your article and you mentioning about how this war might have uh, bridged that gap that existed in the society. But looking back right now, with the 47 days of war, how's the community coming across and participating, especially in this war? If you could explain a little bit.
Yeah, please. Basically, the Ultra-Orthodox community separates itself from the rest of Israelis. They don't serve in the army, don't work, and so forth. Now, through the war, we've seen some Ultra-Orthodox communities that express their ambition and will to join to the army and also to support the efforts of the war in different ways, through donating, through supporting civilians that have been expelled from the houses in the north and in the south. So we've seen more attachment or more careness from the ultra-Orthodox to the Israeli society through the war. And the hope is that this trend of this change will continue after the war.
And moving on from that, how is the community, for example, responding to the situation? Are they in sync with the policies, or especially the end result that we see out here?
They're actually trying to, from one hand, being more close and supportive to the Israelis, rest of the Israelis, but on the other hand, keeps the walls between them and the rest of the Israelis.
So I have a couple of last questions that I wanted to ask you, and one of
Yes.
them is about the situation post this ceasefire agreement. Does any of the IDF objective changes after this, or how does the operations in South Gaza starts after the ceasefire has been lifted? Especially because we have seen during the ceasefire, Hamas has regrouped or rearmed itself. Do you think this is too short span for them to regroup or rearm at this point of time, or this is a strong possibility that it might happen?
I think that I don't know of course, the operational plans, but I assume that there is a plan to the army how to go forward and continue to attack the Hamas on the south and on the north. And right after the ceasefire will stop, the army will continue to do it.
And the final objective that we see out there, it's one of the problems that we have seen is a difference of what the Americans would want the Israelis and what Israel government is looking at. A long-term invasion or a long-term holding the law and order situation in Gaza, do you think the Israeli government will look forward to at least control the law and order situation, or will it like to hand over the security to the Gazans or other authorities, or let's say the Palestinian Authority, and leave Gaza?
I think that basically Israel doesn't want to control Gaza, but it wants to secure its safeness and quiet and stability for long term. And therefore, any arrangement that will ensure to Israel a long term of non-Hamas, non-military group, authority, or international force controlling Gaza, it will retreat. But up until then, Israel will have to control Gaza and clean it up from any weapons, ammunition, and any kind of threat from people of Hamas or from capabilities of the people of Hamas to attack Israel again. And just after we accomplish this mission, we'll be able to hand it over to someone else.
Well, that's all the question that I had, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for taking time and speaking to us.
Thank you. My pleasure. Good evening. Bye.